Hello, my fellow mates. When we talk about electric vehicles, there is one name which comes synonymous to electric vehicles is Tesla. Tesla is the first brand which proved that electric vehicles could be a carrier for everyone. But is that enough to sustain the highly competitive market we are living in today? In the last quarter of 2023, BYD or Build Your Dreams, a Chinese EV manufacturer, has officially surpassed the sales of Tesla.
China's BYD. The company is all set to overtake Tesla on sales. It's expected to happen this quarter.
China's biggest EV maker just overtook Tesla in terms of worldwide sales.
But BYD is now the new sort of 800-pound alpha gorilla in the EV zoo, right? They overtook, in terms of sales, Tesla fourth quarter.
I don't think anywhere in the history of the automobile has any company enjoyed such explosive growth in such a short period of time.
BYD has grown into this powerhouse. You look at the monthly rankings, they're always at the top.
But in the year 2011, when an interviewer asked Elon Musk about BYD, this was his reaction.
BYD, which is also on the West Coast, I think they're ramping up production of their electric vehicles. Warren Buffett owns 10% stake in that. Why do you laugh? BYD is trying to compete. Why do you laugh?
Have you seen their car?
Do you think Tesla was too confident about their technology and business? Because friends, don't consider BYD's success as any seasonal growth. It's a result of 2 decades of strategic planning of the Chinese government and the EV companies of China. And every individual should know about the exceptional story behind this. So my pals and respectables, let me give you the structure or mind map we'll be following in today's episode. We'll start with a small story of why and when China began the EV race. Next, we'll understand 3 strategies of the Chinese government to empower their EV sector, namely subsidies and tax exemptions, first orders, and battery supply chain. And lastly, we'll see BYD's 2 strategies that made them global leader in EV, namely vertical integration and hardware versus software. So let's begin. Look, Chinese EV industry is not an overnight success story. The strategic planning of the country started even before Tesla's EV revolution. And there is a very interesting story behind this. In the year 2000, the country was going through an economic boom. Look at this graph of China's GDP from 1992 to 2022. In a very simple words, left side of the graph represents the GDP growth rate in percentage. And the right side of the graph represents GDP in real value, that is in trillion dollars. And if you look carefully, in the early 2000s, 2 things were happening. Firstly, Chinese GDP began to grow at a rapid rate. And at the same time, the GDP entered into trillion-dollar club, rising north onwards. It means in the early 2000s, the Chinese economy was not only growing at a tremendous speed, but also becoming rich enough for a boom in the auto industry. But during that time, Chinese auto industry was at a very pale situation. The Germans, the Japanese, and the Americans were already the pioneers of the internal combustion engine. And like every part of the world, they dominated the Chinese auto industry as well. And even though China manufactured their cars, there was no Chinese brand which can directly compete with them. And smartly enough, China realized they are very late. They can never compete with them in the internal combustion engine technology. But at the same time, they also knew that they cannot leave their booming auto industry entirely to the foreign brands. So they came up with a very risky strategy. They decided, instead of fighting the sharks of the industry, they better indulge into a completely new segment of vehicles, the electric vehicles. But understand their situation. Nobody even knew if EVs will become a new mode of transport in the future or not. And at that time, China was ready to deploy a highest level of national strategies on EVs. And when we are talking about EV revolution in China, my brothers and sisters, I'm obliged to introduce you to this man named Gang. I know nobody will tell you about this Chinese man because of our weird relationship with China. But honestly, we cannot grow with a blindfold on the progress of our neighbors. So Gang is considered as the father of China's EV industry. He worked for a decade in the R&D department of Audi Corporation and was among the first few people of Tesla who tested the Tesla's first car, Roadster. But in the year 2000, Wang took one of the transforming decisions of his lifetime. He made a strategic proposal to the State Council of China. The proposal was titled Regarding Development of Automobile New Clean Energy as the Starting Line for Leap Forward of China's Automobile Industry. Now this proposal is the result why China sells more than half of the EVs of the world. He became the advisor and soon the Science and Technology Minister of China until 2023. One knew no EV brand will survive in the early 2000s if there is no government support. So his team strategized three support systems as the national policy for EV sector. Firstly, subsidies and tax exemptions. Under the policy, Chinese government started to give subsidies to the EV manufacturers. This not only gave them the required support but also substantially dropped the EV's price in the market. Today, you can buy the cheapest BYD EV in China at a mere cost of $9,700. In comparison, the cheapest Tesla car is around $40,000. On top of that, whoever will purchase a BEV or battery electric vehicle in China can avail a maximum of 12,600 yuan in subsidies. 12,600 yuan comes to around $1,800. This was like 10 to 15% discount on the already subsidized price. Apart from this, the consumers were also exempted from paying the purchase tax on the EVs, which was around 10% for the combustion engine vehicles. So in a sense, the Chinese consumers were getting an average of 20 to 25% extra discount on the subsidized EVs. It is estimated that from 2009 to 2022, the government poured over 200 billion RMB or 29 billion US dollars into relevant subsidies and tax breaks.
We've arguably never seen anything like this in terms of the amount of support that China has extended to automakers specifically pertaining to EVs.
Chinese EV makers have a huge cost advantage. Some reports say by around 25%. Western companies simply cannot beat those prices.
Now that was one part of the government support. The second strategy was to place first orders. Once team knew, even at the low cost, it will take time for the consumers to adapt to the EVs. So during the initial times, almost all of the orders were government orders. These were mostly bus fleets or taxis. This gave the necessary revenue, expertise, and the time for the EV manufacturers to understand the EV industry. And one of the major suppliers to the government was BYD. We'll talk more about BYD further, but for now, the next and the most crucial national strategy was to control the supply chain of the battery technology. Interestingly, battery constitutes around 40% of the EV's cost, and it's one of the most important component of the EV. It's like oil for the EV. So you think about it. Doesn't it make sense for a country that if they want to strengthen their automobile industry, they also make sure that there is uninterrupted supply of the fuel that runs it? That's obvious, right? As a result, the Chinese entities started to acquire mines. The mines of all the minerals required to make batteries. And today, astonishingly, China controls refining and extraction of almost 70% of the global battery mineral mines. So in summary, the initial strategy to strengthen the EV industry in China looks like this. The government and the battery manufacturers invested heavily in the mines across the globe and became the biggest controllers of these mines. Next, they sold the finished products of these mines to the EV manufacturers of China. So the revenue and the profit went back to the government and the battery manufacturers. Now the government used that money to give subsidies to the EV manufacturers to produce cheap EVs and purchase back most of the vehicles, again getting back the benefits of the subsidies given. If you consider all the major economic players of Chinese EV industry as one entity, most of the money remained within the entity. But in the entire process, all the Chinese EV players became strong enough to beat the competitors across the globe. Genius strategy, right? But pals and respectables, it's not as smooth as it seems. There's a catch here as well. According to Fitch Ratings, until last quarter of 2022, most Chinese electric vehicles manufacturers, except BYD Company Limited, remained unprofitable in the first half of 2022 despite strong volume of growth. While the leaders may narrow their losses in the second half of 2022, most are unlikely to break even on the EBIT level within the next 12 to 18 months. So despite the huge government support, most of the Chinese EV companies are struggling to break even. But why is that so? Well, you can blame BYD or the other major Chinese EV companies for that. BYD is not only disrupting the global competition, but also their national competition. Let's understand this through their two major strategies. Firstly, vertical integration. It simply means producing most of the car components by themselves, and it's a great competitive advantage for the company. The founder of the BYD, Wang Xuanfu, was a chemist. He had an immense passion for batteries. So he started his first company in 1995 to produce batteries for mobiles. When EV revolution began in China, they started focusing on building one of the cheapest and the safest batteries for EVs. And today, they are the only EV brand who not only produce their own batteries but also operate their own lithium mines. But how is that benefiting them and affecting every other competition? Well, just imagine if an EV car manufacturer has outsourced its battery production. And tomorrow, the battery supplier has innovated a new battery which is much more safer and lighter. Now the battery supplier can charge a premium price for this battery from the manufacturer, right? Well, this will ultimately increase the price of the car also. But since BYD can produce the same battery without paying the premium price, they can launch their cars with the same battery at a much cheaper price. Now the competitors will be forced to reduce the price of their cars to match with BYD, or else they won't survive in the market. That's why BYD continued to make profits while other competitors were suffering losses.
Our vertical integration capability gives us the flexibility in the fast response to the market trend, as well as the better support for brand developing and customer service.
Superior manufacturing and vertical integration. BYD can do up to 75% of the car internally, including the battery, which is the biggest cost of the car. This gives it a massive advantage.
Now the second strategy of BYD was a marketing strategy. Let's call it hardware versus software. Now this is very interesting. BYD realized that the consumers of their cars were mostly new generation. They were not buying their cars because BYD can run 500 kilometers in one charge compared to 400 kilometers by their competitors. Once they were assured with the safety of the cars, they were least bothered about the hardware of the car. They mostly focused on the software part. What kind of music system it has, the software features, the interior features. And that's why BYD focused on the entertainment system of their cars. And ladies and gentlemen, BYD launched its first car with karaoke system in them. Karaoke in the car was an instant hit. It completely aligned with the aspirations of their customers. And soon, they introduced front cameras to take selfies, video games, and many more. So in summary, BYD has proved itself as the most efficient player to utilize the government benefits and at the same time understanding the aspirations of their customers. And while Elon Musk laughed about them once, they slowly captured Tesla's position to become the biggest EV brand of the world. And that's the end of today's videos, guys. I'll link down all the resources I used to make this video. And if you found anything valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.